Rick Sanchez is the smartest person in the universe, and he could seemingly do anything. But can he beat Goku though? Seems like an odd matchup, right? I mean, I've done Peter Griffin versus Goku before, so it's not too crazy. Realistically, in terms of power, base Goku could blink and just kill Rick Sanchez. That's not even a hyperbole. Dragon Ball characters can literally attack by blinking, and that would be a minimum effort kill right there. Easy win. So why is this a matchup? Well, I want to see if Rick's brains can overcome Brawn. Brains too, to an extent, because Dragon Ball characters are pretty smart when it comes to battle, but you know what I mean. Is his scientific expertise enough to defeat the strongest in Dragon Ball, or are there some things his brain simply can't overcome? Usually we discuss a character's stats to begin with, but it's not really worth talking about Rick's physical power. In terms of his basic self, he does have cybernetic body parts, and he's definitely stronger than the average human, by a pretty decent margin too, but it's not really impressive compared to Dragon Ball. I'm not even talking about current Goku either. Literally any version of Goku could kill Rick easily in terms of pure power. Even Kid Goku from Chapter 1 could get the win relatively easily. Rick may be able to pull off some crazy things, but time and time again, versions of Rick have been killed by relatively simpler things like guns and such. He's still a human at the end of the day, and isn't flawless. But that's when it comes to pure power. If they were to somehow fight without weapons, with Goku all out from the start, ready to kill Rick, he could do it easily. But if we let Rick actually prepare, that's where things get fun. And it's also why we won't cover his stats, because they can change a lot. Rick is like Batman, on crack. At least with how he's treated in fights. If you don't know what I'm referring to, everyone says with prep time, Batman can beat pretty much anyone. It's basically a meme at this point. Rick's like that times 1,000. He has much better tech, and with his portal gun, he has basically beyond infinite resources at his fingertips. Even without much prep time, he's good to begin with. So how would he stand against Goku and Dragon Ball as a whole? We'll only be using things he's shown to do so far, as well as things that are possible in Dragon Ball. So anything from either series in terms of tech and science is on the table. We will give a few scenarios, including prep time for some, but we won't be cheap and say, with prep time you could do anything. That's just a no limits fallacy. So if it's something that's happened in Rick and Morty, or something that's possible with Dragon Ball science, then it's fair game. Pretty much like any versus battle video, we do still have to rely on hypotheticals to an extent, but we're going to stray away from making stuff up like saying Rick could just make a kill Goku device. Although that's actually not that crazy to say, but we'll get to that later. Let's begin by covering what Rick is capable of without prep, as in what he always has on hand, and just a brief overview of his stats. Like I said, it's not really worth covering his stats, so we won't go too deep into them, but we can briefly gloss over it. Afterwards, we'll send him through a gauntlet with preparation. Pretty much at all times, there are a few things that Rick has on hand. For one, he has an exoskeleton that can do multiple things. It drastically boosts his senses, gives him various lasers and other weapons, allows him to survive extreme injuries and even regenerate partially, and he can do the Piccolo thing where he extends his limbs. He's also been shown to put his body on autopilot essentially, so even if he's unconscious, his body can still move. His defensive capabilities are pretty good too, like he's been shown to have force fields around him, and also weaponize those force fields in the process. Plus, if he ever dies, he has multiple ways of reviving himself. Usually it requires an external force like Morty being there. But for example, if none of his friends are around to revive him in his main universe, he then gets rerouted to another universe. And in Season 7, there was an episode where Rick died multiple times, getting sent to Valhalla, and then coming back to life. So in Dragon Ball's verse, I guess he would be sent to other worlds somehow, and could probably find a way back. There's a precedent for this, it's something that happens in Rick and Morty, and in Dragon Ball. People in Otherworld can keep their bodies, and while it is tough, there are ways to traverse from the living world to Otherworld and vice versa. So that's worth noting too. And that's just his actual body. At all times, he usually has some sort of equipment on him, notably his portal gun, which of course lets him teleport, get resources, and do various other things, but he could also weaponize it too, like sending people to dimensions that purposely kill them. He's pretty much always wearing his lab coat, and that could do different things too, such as attacking people or making him intangible. And it depends on what equipment he has on hand at the moment, but he has various different forms of equipment that could do things like manipulate time, duplicate and absorb powers, freeze people or melt people, instantly kill people, analyze his opponents, make him stronger, utilize curses, and so many different types of powers that it's kind of tough to cover just in this ability section. So we'll be looking at specific ones later on that could be useful here. The standard equipment is more important because that's usually stuff he's going to have on hand regardless, and what we're going to do here is basically just throw him into the Dragon Ball verse, and with prep time he'll decide what he needs. So instead of covering literally everything he can do, later on we'll just be looking at what's actually relevant here. Plus, outside of his portal gun, he could use his ship for travel, which is also weaponized in its own way, but has infinite speed on its own. As for actual stats, again, it varies a ton. But with his standard abilities, he's pretty much building level. But again, this is just him with his standard equipment. And we see multiple examples of this, he's pretty casually around here. You could probably even put him above that, like for example, he took attacks from Phoenix Person, who's capable of destroying a city. And there was that one episode where he fought against Zeus in space, but Zeus doesn't really have too many feats. So it's kind of tough to judge where that scales. Speed-wise, I think Massively Hypersonic is a good range to put him in, at least when it comes to reactions and combat speed. Feel free to drop another one below if I'm missing it, but in terms of just his actual body without any sort of weird tech or whatever, the best speed feat that I've seen is him dodging that space laser when he's fighting the president. and that laser went from orbit to the planet in a few seconds. So at minimum, this basically puts him at massively hypersonic because he's dodging that, which is obviously really insane as is. But again, we're not too focused on the actual stats here, more so the abilities that he has. But at least now we've established the baseline. Now let's go into some more important abilities that could really be relevant here. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to drop a like. It shows me you want to see more like this. So in case you couldn't already tell, Rick could do some pretty crazy things with his science. So that leads us to an important question. Could Rick learn ki through science? That is up to debate because, while it may be possible, we still are only going to use things we've actually seen. But honestly, I think we've seen enough that does support this. First of all, Rick has used tech before to learn different power systems. Like, for example, he's done this with magic multiple times. But Dragon Ball also sets a precedent for this too, which kind of makes us 100% certain, because you know what he could do with science? Make an infinite energy engine and energy absorption devices. This seems like a simple solution that Rick himself would probably come up with, and Dr. Gero did both of these things. Infinite energy for 17 and 18, and ki absorption for himself and Android 19. Plus, there's all the other things that androids from Universe 2 could do, and there's also 7-3 who's purely mechanical and can copy abilities. So the tech for this does exist in Dragon Ball. Sure, it's not the same exact thing as learning ki for yourself, but it does show us that in Dragon Ball you can make something equivalent to that. And in 7-3's case, he actually does copy a lot of abilities, like he's flat out used to copy Ultra Instinct from Moro, as well as copying Moro's magic and Piccolo's regeneration, among other abilities. Knowing Rick, he might be able to create a more potent and convenient version of either of these things. An infinite energy engine, which he's already basically made, energy absorption devices, which he has also made before, and things to replicate attacks, which he's also created before. So no, it's not crazy to say that Rick can just learn ki through science, or at the very least, modify himself in order to do so. Speaking of magic though, Rick could likely figure out how to use the Dragon Balls for himself as a weapon. Now, this might be delving a bit into the hypothetical, which we want to avoid as much as possible, but there's also precedent for this in both series. So, multiple times Rick has been shown to harvest magic with his technology and turn it into weaponry. A perfect example of this is when he did it with the fortune cookies and used them as weapons, not only to buff himself, but to affect others. Same goes with the episode where Morty had a pet dragon. Rick figured out how to utilize an external magic power with science. And the craziest thing is, he did this in a place that had no technology. It was literally said that tech doesn't work in this place, so this was just done with pure intelligence. He made magical devices and was able to utilize magic after the fact. The same also goes for that one time he countered the devil's curses with his own technology. Okay, well that's just Rick and Morty. What about Dragon Ball? Well, to go a bit further, one Dragon Ball video game supports this. While it is just a video game and not part of the main story, still, it's worth mentioning because it is official. In the mobile game Dragon Ball Legends, a character named Zaha uses a prototype of the Super Dragon Balls, and essentially wishes for whatever he wants, whenever he wants. It's called the Omnificence Crystal. And obviously the Dragon Balls don't just spawn out of thin air. They're created by Namekians, so people can actually create these magical devices. So who's to say Rick can't just make his own wish-granting things, especially if he gets a hold of the Dragon Balls and figures out a way to use them like Zaha does with the Omnificence Crystal. Issue is, he would need to find the Dragon Balls. If only we had an example of something in the series that could find Dragon Balls. Oh yeah, Bulma, Pilaf, and the Red Ribbon Army, they all figured out how to do this, and that's just them with the Earth Dragon Ball set. Not to mention, Bulma actually did this for the Super Dragon Balls too, and I have no doubt that Rick could create something like this. Of course, he would have to actually know about them first, but once he does, like, come on, he would create a Dragon Ball radar. And we know he can make a ship that has infinite speed, so gathering them wouldn't be hard either, especially with the portal gun as well. So if he had prior knowledge about the Dragon Balls, this is an easy path to victory for anything. And of course, this is only relevant when prep time is involved, but it's pretty much an instant win. We won't just chalk it up to that though, so we should see what else he's capable of, but just remember this part. He could severely cheat by using this. Rick has done some other crazy things with tech, like he knows how to completely stop time with it. And it's not like Hit's broke-ass time skip where he just uses a key-based ability involving him making a pocket dimension, which can be overpowered like what Goku did. No, Rick literally just stops time for everybody. And he could affect it in multiple other ways too. Plus, he could warp reality and create and destroy realities on a whim. Like, one example of this is him creating a video game respawn system for Morty. In Season 4, Episode 8, Rick created a device that lets Morty essentially save and load progress. He explained this device as taking a moment in time, transporting Morty to the new reality, and then starting him from there. These realities were pre-existing, but Rick was capable of merging them together and destroying the others if he wanted to. Which leads us to our next point. Rick's tech has the power to create and destroy universes, and not just regular universes, multiverses. His tech is insanely powerful. He's casually mentioned nuking universes before and being able to destroy in other ways, or another great example, his car battery is powered by a pocket universe that he created, a universe that is actually infinite. Or just so Beth had a place to play, he created an entire new reality for her, and on top of that made it impossible for her to harm herself here. Rick could also create diseases and weapons meant to specifically kill certain species, and of course he could scan and absorb knowledge from different species too. Pathogens are actually pretty helpful in Dragon Ball, more than you'd expect. Like Saiyans for example, they are stated to be beyond the capabilities of the Galactic Patrol's extinction bomb, But other types of diseases or poison can affect them, like Goku dying of the heart virus comes to mind, or Gohan being affected by Lavender's poison. So poisons and diseases can work in Dragon Ball. Not on everyone, but it's worth noting, and Rick can manufacture specific bioweapons with enough knowledge on who he's fighting. Rick has also occasionally showcased knowledge of the plots that he's involved in, and has shown awareness and control of him being in a TV show. This leads us to another weird point, which won't be relevant for this video because it's kind of cheating, but it's funny to mention. So Rick is pretty knowledgeable about pop culture in general, including anime. There haven't been any overt mentions of Dragon Ball and Rick and Morty. I think there have been a few subtle references here and there, but there's a very realistic chance that Rick is actually aware of the story of Dragon Ball. And we don't know if for sure he is, so we won't use that here, especially because it just makes everything easy for him. But if he were knowledgeable about all of that, you could argue that right off the bat, he'd know he's in a Dragon Ball plotline and just speedrun it all. This won't be considered for the main video, but I feel like someone would bring it up and it's kind of funny to think about. Like, he would just be self-aware about that and instantly rise to the top. But let's ignore that. Finally, one of Rick's most basic abilities is traveling to different dimensions and realities. Dragon Ball, as we know, has multiple universes and multiple realities, so this might not be too useful during battles, but at the very least, Rick could perform inter-universal travel, if not interdimensional travel, and go to things like Dragon Ball Heroes or GT or whatever. And with him scanning knowledge from all other species, that would make him even more cracked than he already is. So, now on to actual fights. Usually in these types of videos, I'll do a gauntlet, and I wasn't really sure what type of gauntlet to send him into here and how to do it. Like, obviously he needs prep time for each fight, and for certain enemies, he could just do the same things to defeat them. So we'll do this like part versus battle, part gauntlet, and part what if. Rick is thrown into the mainline version of Dragon Ball. So chapter 1 of Dragon Ball is where he starts, and his goal is to make it to the end of Dragon Ball Super. Let's say some force beyond Rick's control is preventing him from leaving here. He obviously wants to make it back to his universe, so in order to do that, he needs to make it to the end of Dragon Ball Super. Whenever he completes one arc, he instantly moves on to the next one, but he will have prep time for each fight. He'll have objectives similar to our protagonist, which of course includes defeating the antagonist. And as a bonus, if Rick does make it to the end, we'll actually put him up against Goku too. Any knowledge from previous arcs carries over as well. So I guess we start by covering how he handles each arc. In the first arc, his objective would be to find the Dragon Balls and defeat the Peel-Off Gang. That is really simple for him once he learns of the Dragon Balls. The Peel-Off Gang is no threat to him either, even if he doesn't know about the Dragon Balls right off the bat. But once he does learn about the Dragon Balls, he'd probably find them pretty quickly. But what would he wish for? Well, there's a lot of options, and he probably would make some sort of really logical wish. Rick could ask how to become the strongest in this reality, at least within Shenron's scope of knowledge, or he could use this wish to learn about Ki. Or maybe he makes a cheap wish and asks to have the power over the Dragon Balls for himself and grant his own wishes, or somehow obtain the essence of them to implement in some device. Or another likely option, he summons Shenron and instead of making a wish, he finds some way to utilize the power over the Dragon Balls with tech, or does this by using Shenron's power somehow, like trapping him in a weapon or whatever. I'm sure he'll find some creative way to do this, but either way, now he has the Dragon Balls in the palm of his hand. Next arc, the 21st World Tournament. The tournament is the biggest hurdle for him as Rick can't use equipment here. But that's fine. I mean, they've let cyborgs enter multiple times. Look at Tao, look at Android 18. But okay, let's say that he can't even use his own cybernetic technology. As long as Rick knows he's prepping for a tournament, he of all people would find some sort of way to win. This is where him learning Ki comes into play. Surveillance and research on all the other contestants isn't against the rules. Well, maybe it is, but I guess as long as no one knows about it, it's not a problem. And Rick, of course, could just scan data from everybody and use that to his advantage. This isn't just something in Rick and Morty, this obviously happens in Dragon Ball too, like Dr. Gero did that to improve himself and his androids. As for Ki, Rick could realize that this is the key to winning, no pun intended. And here's where he'd probably figure out how to harness it for himself. At the very least, he could use an infinite energy engine in the tournament, like no one's gonna know about that. Plus, he could just implant data into his brain and copy techniques of the fighters and look at how they're fighting. He'd probably have the perfect counters to them. He does have some level of instinctive actions after all already, and he could basically program himself to fight them if he doesn't already have the knowledge to do so himself. In terms of raw power, that's where the infinite energy engine comes in. So, on top of learning Ki and downloading a bunch of data, he could just have infinite energy right off the bat. Like, he wouldn't need to know about the other androids for this either. He could just do this himself. He'd probably find some more roundabout way to do it, but he could do it. And everything we've mentioned so far still works within the logic of both series. As for the Red Ribbon arc, it's no issue. Rick has so many ways of taking out the entire army, even including stronger opponents, so this is a very easy pass for him. Now Rick is getting more accustomed to this weird verse, and he's sent into another tournament, the 22nd. As a modified fighter, now his issue is keeping up with everyone's power physically. Is Rick capable of modifying himself to the point where he could fight Moonbusters? Yes, easily. For one, Rick has invented so many powerful technologies that I have no doubt he could do this. Like I said before, he's created pocket universes, he could destroy universes and realities with tech too, etc. And obviously in Dragon Ball, there's multiple mechanical fighters that are on this level. Dr. Gero's androids were insanely powerful to begin with. There's also 7-3 or the Universe 3 androids. all of whom contended with multiversal fighters. So once again, this fits the logic of both verses. Pretty much right off the bat, Rick could essentially make himself a multiversal fighter. And that's just solely from a tech standpoint. That's not even considering the fact that he could learn ki, beyond using artificial energy from an infinite energy engine, and also disregarding the fact that he could just control the Dragon Balls himself. Now onto King Piccolo. Knowing what he knows about the Dragon Balls, killing Piccolo means no Kami, which means no Dragon Balls. If Rick still wants to make use of them, then the natural thing to do is seal Piccolo. Thankfully he has multiple sealing methods, and not that he can't kill Piccolo, but if he wants to handle it without that, then he could easily seal him. He doesn't even need knowledge of the Mafuba. Rick has showcased his own sealing technology, and again, he probably has the Dragon Balls here already. And that's just working within the scope of both universes. We're not even considering the fact that Rick could probably make some mechanical Mafuba. For the 23rd World Tournament, Saiyan Saga, and Namek, all Rick really needs is raw power and later on space travel, and then he can get through everything here. So we kind of breeze through these arcs. But now Rick is encountering more aliens, which means more abilities for him. These wouldn't be obstacles, these would be opportunities. Like Ginyu body swapping with him for an example, you might think that's an issue at first, but Rick could swap himself back. I mean, he turned himself into a pickle before. He could turn himself back into himself. But on top of that, he could use the abilities of other aliens for himself, either by taking data from them and implementing it into himself, or actually using them to power devices, like what if he kills Goldo and uses him to make his own time stop on command? He can make devices out of organic beings, so this isn't impossible. Not to mention, being on Namek means he could learn about a new set of Dragon Balls to buff him even further. If not from a physical standpoint, at least from an intelligence standpoint. Gathering more knowledge and data, he would even have info for things like the Namekian Book of Legends. Shenron was the one to disclose this info, but it was Dende Shenron, so we don't know if this info was in the original Shenron. Regardless, by now with access to Purunga, he would have that, so he'd have way more knowledge about the universe around him, including godly figures and history. Now onto the Android Saga. Rick could stop the androids before they even become a threat. Assuming he encounters 19 and 20 like the present timeline, he first has to defeat them. Not an issue. He could just extract data from Jiro's brain, find the lab, and find out all about the androids. 16, 17, 18, and Cell are never activated, and again, more data for him to use to further improve himself. As for Future Cell though, the one that we all know, he's still arriving here because Rick shutting down these androids won't affect that. Thankfully, Rick would have already collected data on Cell by this point and knows about the project. Plus, he's probably already really cracked in terms of strength, so he'd know any faults or weaknesses for Cell, and probably would have the perfect way to defeat him, if not just from raw power alone. For the Buu Saga, learning Bobity's magic would make Rick even more stupidly cracked. Replicating that would let him stop Buu if he needs, even though he already has the raw power for it. So now, he's a fighter with data from some of the greatest warriors in the series, has infinite energy, has access to the Dragon Ball's powers, and also has magic on the level of Bobity and maybe even the Kais and Buu. Again, with access to Ki, and with how powerful his technology is by now, none of these are obstacles to him, they're just opportunities to grow even stronger. Once we start entering Super, things change pretty quickly. Of course, we have crazy feats right away in Battle of Gods that shoot characters beyond universal level, but the thing is, this entire time we've shown that Rick has been able to grow as a warrior with Ki, possibly with the benefits of other species' DNA, and he has endless reserves of artificial energy on top of his actual Ki, just like an android would. And he has access to magic too. In Battle of Gods, he definitely couldn't defeat Beerus, but he doesn't even need to. He just needs to impress Beerus as a rival. Beerus might not think too highly of Rick messing with the laws of the universe and such, but his intellect and strength would be pretty viable. Plus, knowing Beerus likes good food as well, that could be a thing for Rick to exploit. I don't know how good of a chef he is, but he would at least have a wide array of knowledge in regards to the foods from other places in his own universe, as well as things in Dragon Ball too. And on top of that, regular Earth food is pretty good. Beerus was even impressed by things like cup noodles. So the bar is probably pretty low. A device or some robot that makes food for Beerus would definitely be enough. Maybe Rick makes his own Vegapunk microwave. Or he just finds something on Earth to impress him with. It shouldn't be too hard, and that way he'd get by and wouldn't have to actually fight Beerus. Of course, his power wouldn't be enough to defeat him anyways, but Beerus just needs to be impressed and then find his rival. So what if Rick is that rival? Well, now he enters the realm of gods, applying that power to himself. Let's say he is able to access godly Ki. This isn't exclusive to Saiyans. And even if it is, well, Rick just needs to alter his DNA a bit. Either way, he's getting access to godly Ki right now, either through training or through science. He has the resources for it. Soon enough, Frieza gets revived, and he could definitely defeat him there. If he's in the Universe X tournament, even without gadgets at this point, he has multiple paths to victory, so we'll say he passes through that too. Zamasu would definitely hate him and steal his body in another timeline. The good thing about Rick is that he'd have various countermeasures against this. For one, by now he could have set up another Phoenix project. So if Zamasu steals his body then kills him, well, Rick gets sent to another body and he's fine. Or, like I mentioned before, he has various ways of swapping bodies. Who cares if Super Shenron swap bodies? Rick could rectify that with science or even by using Ginyu's ability if he got that. No Goku Black, but Rick Black. So too bad for Zamasu, but Rick already has multiple counters against this. Rick Black would fight Zamasu Rick, but it would probably be stopped before he can go any further in his plan. So that whole arc is avoided. As for the tournament power, Rick will have a few days of prep time already. And that's the worst possible outcome for everyone else, because with a few days of prep and knowing which universes he's fighting, he'll have more than enough time to do recon on every other universe and form some sort of contingency plan against them. Universe 3 is easy, for example. They're all tech-based, he just needs to figure out how to hack them or something. Maybe even making them fight for him. And finding weaknesses in the others as well as seeing what they're capable of shouldn't be a problem. Giving him prep time with him knowing what he's up against, that's the worst thing possible. I guess we'll say he replaces Frieza in this tournament and the rest of the team's normal, so no Frieza means no Broly to deal with. So next we send him into the Moro arc. With his own magic he can counter Moro already, plus he of course has artificial energy to power him too, and he can rely on that for this battle specifically because Moro can't absorb that. Once more, he has multiple avenues for defeating someone. And as for the Granola arc, well, it probably wouldn't even occur because with no Frieza, there's not much to set the events in motion. Same with the lack of 7-3 to lead the heaters towards Zuno, although it does make me wonder if Rick would eventually find Zuno somehow. But regardless, even if it did occur, Rick wouldn't even be a target of Granola. There's no reason for Granola to go after him. Again, that's if it even does happen, which it probably wouldn't. Finally, we're at Superhero. As of the time of recording, Daima isn't out yet, so I guess this will be our endpoint. Rick would be fighting mechanical beings. Dealing with Gamma 1 and Gamma 2 shouldn't be too tough. And if he infiltrates the Red Ribbon Army like Piccolo, Cell Max is stopped before he's ever awoken. This makes me wonder what he'd think about Hedo. Same for Jiro and Bulma if he ever meets any of them. But I guess that means he made it to the end of Super, so what if he were to fight Goku now? Well, as we've seen, if he has any level of prep time and knows about Goku, he could find multiple ways to exploit weaknesses, or at the very least, find how to best counter him in combat. Without prep time, however, this fight would definitely be much more interesting, and would probably be more of an issue for him, even with how much he's prepared and how strong he's grown. Goku still is a genius in his own way in terms of combat, so it would be a scientific genius versus a combat genius. It really depends what Rick's arsenal would be at this point, because there is a potential for him to actually win here. It just more so depends on what he's actually picked up on along the way. But, like I said, if he does have prep time, I think he has taken this battle, especially with all the stuff he's gotten in this video so far. But let me know what you think below. How would a fight between Goku and Rick go? Do you think Rick would stop earlier on? Do you think he would make it this far, and how easy would it be? Let me know below. And as usual, I know it's a power scaling video, so be civil in the comments. It makes the discussions better anyways. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.